So let's make a prompt start. Welcome especially to members of the public who've braved the wind and the weather to come here today, and beginning to, I've seen quite a lot of you recently, so it's great to see you again, and welcome. In the event of a fire, please await direction from the West of England Combined Authority staff who will help assist with the evacuation, and don't return to the building until instructed to do so by the wardens. Can I also remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed and can be watched on the authority's YouTube channel, and it's very important therefore that if you want to be heard on that channel that you use your microphones. There's a roving mic for people, members of the public. Members of the Scrutiny Committee are listed on the agenda. We have Councillor Gollop here standing in for Councillor Smith as audit members. We also have Mike Bell, and I think that's it from North Somerset. Bird, sorry. Yes, sorry, I've just promoted you, haven't I? Sorry, Mike. Mike Bird as an observer from North Somerset Council, and may have thoughts about the new LEP arrangements. Do any members have any interest to declare on any items of business? I'll take that as a no. I should declare that I work for Sustrans. I have mentioned this a number of times as director of the National Cycle Network. I rarely get involved in individual council matters, and I haven't had any conflicts of interest in the last 4 years as part of a WECA scrutiny. But I think it's always worth mentioning that. I'd now like to invite the Metro Mayor, Dan Norris, to answer questions from the committee. I just want to remind people that this is not the moment for questions which have been submitted from the public. That will come at item 7. And if you do have questions for the Metro Mayor, these can be submitted by tonight at 5 o'clock and presented to the next committee on Friday in Hanham. And the deadline for any statements you want to make is Thursday at noon. So this is very much, I'm afraid to say, just for scrutiny members at the moment. And I'm going to go, I'm going to go to the Vice Chair here, Alison, and I think you've got a question about governance and participation.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Welcome, Mayor, to our first, I think, with the newly formed Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which you've been attending.
And actually, I want to say that for good reasons, Dan has not been able to come to the last 2, but he's routinely come in the 2 years previous to this. So it is the exception. So I forgot to acknowledge that. I'm sorry, Dan.
And we're grateful for the opportunity to ask you questions. So as you'll be aware, Mayor, we've been doing what was described as a deep dive into the BSIP subject, which of course has been a somewhat politically controversial subject in the light of the ending of the supported bus services. So we know this is a very hot topic. And what we were able to do was to take soundings and views from the politicians in the unitary authorities, as well as talk to the officers, and it's been a very helpful process. But one of the things that very much emerged very loud and clear from that process was that there's still a lot of pain from the unitary authorities feeling that they're still very much out of some of the really important conversations. And in particular, that the advisory boards are not being used in the way that they're hopefully intended to be used under the Constitution. So that, for example, members of the advisory boards have been unable to have full discussion on agenda items which they particularly wanted to be aired, which were vetoed by you, we gather. So that obviously, that process and that approach is very much not in harmony with the recommendations from Grant Thornton and the Solus report, which is a process which is still ongoing through the transformation programme. And so I would like to know why these advisory boards are not being used to greater effect, and why matters that were raised as being matters of genuine concern that ought to be aired were not allowed by you.
Okay, well, look, thank you everybody for your attendance today. Good to see you all. Happy New Year to those of you I haven't seen in person yet so far. Thank you, Alison. Well, look, I'd simply say to you, I'm not aware of vetoing anything in terms of any agenda, so that's news to me, but we can perhaps explore that. I mean, what I'd simply say is that I've had some requests, for example, on your council, the transport lead has asked to have meetings which have happened. I'm always happy to do those extra meetings. There's not been further requests. So I simply say that this is about dialogue, discussion, asking for things that you want, not being silent, and then coming through committees to say what things aren't happening. I think, we're all grown-ups. We have to reach out and raise issues. If I have issues, I will raise them with the leaders or the respective leads and do that. And I expect them to do the same, and many of them do, frankly. So I can't really add to that, because I think at the end of the day, it's down to all of us to make the whole structure work. And I think that advisory boards are important. So therefore, I'm keen for them to work and happen and be what we need them to be, because that makes me better as mayor anyway. I need to know stuff. You'll appreciate that with a population of 1.1 million, it is not possible for me to pick up all the concerns of the public. I rely on councillors and others to inform me about what is going on, the issues that they think are happening at the moment, or they might reasonably foresee. That is incredibly helpful information. And obviously my officers are trying to do the same as well, as they liaise with the unitary authority officers who are also aware of many of these issues. So I don't think there's much I can add to that, other than to say I'm quite happy about those mechanisms to work, would like them to work. And I'm always available to anybody who wants to talk to me. They all have my phone number, they can ring me, they can ask, and I've actually held extra meetings when people have asked for them.
So can I take that as an agreement that you are in favour of open dialogue about matters which ought to be being discussed by the advisory boards, and when agenda items are suggested, they will be allowed?
Well, it depends what the agenda item is, Alison. Of course, it would all entirely depend on what the request was or what people wanted. But I have no problem with people putting forward ideas and wanting to embrace as many as I possibly can. What I'm always aware of, though, is that sometimes we as organisations can talk a lot about stuff and we're not disciplined and focused. And there is one of me, and there's an awful lot of people that I have responsibility for and represent. So I do want to use my time efficiently and well. Now, sometimes I think that we have chats that are not focused. And all I ask is that for anybody who wants to talk about anything, that they have prepared their agenda, that they have given information in advance if it's helpful to those discussions, for example, so that we have meaningful and important discussions. I think the issues we're all responsible for are significant and important to people, and we owe the public that we have discussions that are
financial budgeting as well.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Nice to meet you. Well, look, as soon as possible is the answer, because we've got a climate emergency, and I really believe that's the case. We have set ourselves very ambitious net zero 2030 targets, rightly in my view. They will be hard to achieve, but we should not stop trying to achieve them. And in order to do that, we need to do some of the things that you just alluded to, among others. Temple Quarter is clearly a very important project, but it's also a great opportunity. It's something we should embrace and be excited about, not fearful of. And I'm confident that we can do all those things that you're saying. I think the double accounting is very important. We've got to have proper numbers and meaningful figures and statistics so that we can measure progress or otherwise, so that we can choose our course if we're not achieving the objectives we want to see. How we do that, well, look, I'll be having a whole lot of discussions, and I hope that includes you if you've got strong views about it, and your party, because that's what I always try and do. Because the one thing I can assure you as Metro Mayor is you do not have a monopoly on virtue or knowledge or intelligence or anything else. You require and need all the people in the region to help you achieve some very, very important targets. So I hope that helps you. Get involved, talk to me, let me know, drop me a note if you don't have time for a meeting quickly. Always useful stuff, because we need to think about all those things. At the moment, we're obviously at this key time where we're trying to get the delivery vehicle sorted. That's key for us at this precise moment. But as soon as that happens, which will be hopefully very soon, we need to be thinking about all the things that you've rightly raised.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I mean, I guess what you're saying is that the combined authority, like its unitary authorities, is taking its declared climate crisis seriously, which I believe. But I guess it would be great soon to know. I appreciate that it costs money and a lot of thinking to start doing carbon budgeting seriously. I mean, it's not a small thing to do. But what would be nice is perhaps for us to know soon what the process is for that, and have some hard sort of dates and things.
Well, the first part of that process is going to be to agree to the additional staff that the combined authority needs, because this is exactly why we need them, because we're taking on all these important projects, and they are key and central to our future. But we need to do exactly the kind of things you're talking about. And that needs time and effort, and individuals who are capable of doing that and have the time, obviously, to do them. So what I'm anxious about is making sure that, given that we have got all these additional responsibilities that we've already, many of us, not necessarily all of us in this room, but have previously voted to make these things happen, we now need to match that decision with resource, human resource in particular, so that we can do exactly the kind of things that you're raising, because there are other things too. It's not just carbon counting, there's a whole set of stuff. And we're in, let me just remind you as well, we are in an exciting place at the time for unitary authorities, which is really tough. And you have my sympathies hugely, because I've been a councillor like you guys. I've spent a long time doing that, used to work in child protection. I know what the real world's like, and you're having to face it. You've got diminishing resource in real terms, and yet increasing demand and populations to challenge. Awful challenge. You've got to try and recruit staff. Not just recruit them, but retain them, because the jobs they're doing are important, but very tough and take their toll. All those things are really, really important. But what I would say is that the combined authority is an area where we have done well. And many of you will remember, because some of you campaigned with me or against me or whatever it was. But one of the big things that I was saying was that we were invisible as a region, because we had a low profile Metro Mayor previously. And we need to change that. And I hope that some of you will agree that that has happened, whether you agree my priorities are the right thing, that's another issue, that's politics. But what no one, I think, can reasonably doubt is that we have resource way above what we had under the previous mayor. That is a fantastic problem. The debate about whether we do it on your issue or somebody else's, or what Alison's concerned about, or anybody else, what a great place to be in, because we've got those resources. Before we didn't. We were having discussions about we've got no resources. Now we've got resources, we've got to use them as wisely and as well as we can. And that's where you all come in, because your views are all valid, all important to me. Won't necessarily please you all, because to decide is to divide. It's just one of those things. But isn't it great that we've got hundreds of millions of pounds that we didn't otherwise have to do some really important bits of work? So I hope we all pull together and take advantage of that. And I tell you why we've got to do that, even though it's tempting sometimes to be opposition for opposition's sake. We need to deliver on what we've already got, because that is what determines us getting more money in the future. It's a very simple equation. If we do not do well with these hundreds of millions of pounds that I and my colleagues have been able to secure from government, they will not give us more money in future. They'll say, we gave them hundreds of millions, we gave them £2/3 of a billion quid, what do they do with it? If we do well with it, we'll get more. And believe me, I know that from having been a government minister. I know that you'd say to your civil servants, right, who's done well with the money we've given them in the past? Right, let's give them some more, because we've got a good chance that that will be used wisely and well. So there's a responsibility with being successful in getting money. That's actually when it all starts. As soon as I get the money, I'm relieved and pleased. And then I think, gosh, what a responsibility. We've got to spend that really, really effectively. Okay, thank you.
Chief Executive just wants to make a couple of very quick points.
Yeah, just to say, it's of huge importance to us. The Metro Mayor has set out in everything he's talked about the importance he attributes to it, and therefore we as an organisation are there to deliver on behalf of him and indeed his committee, really. So the importance is there. The capacity point is well made. We are, there's a lot of conversation at our management team about it. How do we, make sure we reflect what we're doing? There's lots of, in-depth training around carbon accounting going on in our organisation at the moment. So we're putting some resource behind it. We have a directorate which we didn't have, 12 months ago. We had just didn't have the capacity, or indeed, therefore, the capability to drive it forward. We do now have that on our journey as well, really, and we've got to get the balance right. Bristol Temple Quarter was mentioned quite rightly. 10,000 homes, is the joint second biggest regeneration in the country. Today, it is of huge importance, and we're looking across that from a range of factors to get the balance right. It's got to work for the public sector and all the priorities we have, and the private sector as well. Otherwise, nothing will happen, and we're trying to make sure that we get that balance right. But the environmental green agenda is right at the heart of it, as are a number of other aspects of what we've done. I'm not going to bring him in unless it's needed to, but we do have Roger Hoare, who's our director for the environment side, who could talk for a long time about it. But I know the mayor's time is more important for us at the moment because we've only got him for a short period.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I mean, you're right, we've been good at getting money in. So the £106 million, the BSIP funding, a fantastic opportunity. We then saw the loss of over 30 bus routes and communities cut off completely from the bus network. I think we may have a few here today to talk to us about that. So one of the political priorities was demand responsive transport. How do you think that's currently going? And if you think it's not going well, what are your plans to fix it?
Thank you very much for that question. Appreciate that. Well, look, the difficulty about getting money is, yes, it's fantastic for all the reasons I've just mentioned that we've got this money. It's good. It's a good problem still. But it doesn't come unconditionally. It isn't like, over to you is the money, do what you want. I wish. The government obviously stipulate quite a lot of strict criteria, rules, how it should be used, over what timescales, etc., etc. So that slightly ties our hands about some of the options. And I can assure you that if I had the freedom to use that money, I would have been doing different things that I think would have perhaps dealt with some of the issues that your constituents and other ward councillors have. But I don't have that. I don't have that power. It's like a contract. You get given the money because you agree to do it in a certain way and over a certain time. Now, let me be very clear why the buses have gone. Because look, we'd all like to keep every bus going everywhere. Of course we would if we could do that. But the truth is, despite that huge amount of money, we still have greater demand than the resources we've been given, even with that. Now, other metro mayors come up to me and they are very envious and jealous because we've done incredibly well in these areas. They are having much worse cuts to do with their bus services than we. Doesn't mean I'm complacent about it at all here. I take it very seriously. I'm acutely aware that if you're a person or a community affected by a bus cut, it is a big deal. It's not a minor thing. It is a huge deal. That's the one thing I lose sleep about. I'm thinking of the person who's in a very remote place who could lose their job or maybe can't take up a job because there isn't a bus service or whatever it might be, or a community that is isolated, perhaps because of age profile or whatever it is, that can't get to a GP because their GP isn't very close. It's a long way, might mean a bus change, all sorts of things. So those are the headaches that really worry me. And of course, for the reasons that you will agree with me, I know, because we've had discussions about this before, I think that what the Margaret Thatcher's government did in terms of bus deregulation was a disaster for all the reasons I thought back then, and has been proved to be the case now. But I can't change democracy. You know, there is a democratically elected Conservative government that is setting the rules. We have to abide by that quite rightly, just like when there's a new government, hopefully we will all have to abide by those rules, and hopefully there'll be better rules. But we are where we are. Now, the big challenge has been several things. The first one has been partly what I alluded to before, where I talked about the huge pressures you are all under. You have, you know, by law, you have to do certain things, and you ain't getting enough money because in real terms, they're cuts. And that has also affected the line that I have responsibility for. So you will have heard me say before, I know, but bus levies were frozen. I can't remember exactly how long ago it is. Someone will probably tell me 18 months ago, 2 years ago now, hard to remember, by the unitary leaders. They decided to keep the amount of money that the levy, this is the money that comes from the councils that are for subsidised buses that my officers deal with, because obviously they're responsible for the buses. Doesn't mean we're responsible for the money or exactly what happens, but we deal with that because obviously we're dealing with lots of bus things anyway. And that money was frozen, and that coincided then, for all the reasons we understand, pandemic, etc., with a huge increase in inflation in the bus industry. And that inflation rate was even higher than we all experience as individuals. It was in the 40%. So it's got so if you think about it, same amount of money, inflation 40%, you're going to get fewer buses for that amount of money, unfortunately. And that is just a simple fact. Now, there are some slight issues about that. I mean, I want to ask all councillors if they can put that levy up to reflect the need, and I would like them to do that. That's certainly happening in other parts of the country where they have similar pressures to us. So there is an interesting question to be asked. I am in a more difficult position than my other Metro Mayor colleagues of all parties, because I don't have precepting powers. It's not like I can say in the council tax bill, well, look, these services are so important, I want to raise tax to pay for them because I don't have those powers. I'm unique in that, I think. I think I'm the only Metro Mayor who is in that position. And so you've got huge inflation, fixed levy, and you've got no precept. Plus, you've also got a situation where commercial services have been radicalised. So because of the shortage of bus drivers, bus services provided by the private operators for profit were not being reliable. And I remember you raising some of the concerns quite rightly with me at the time. Buses not showing up, phantom buses on the signs, all the things. When I came to your ward to see your constituents and things, all those things, absolutely true. So what we have done is a whole range of things, and the bus companies have done what they want to do, obviously with profit first and foremost, because that's what they're about. And what they did was they reduced a number of services, the cuts that you referred to, I'm sure, in order to make the existing routes or the remaining routes more efficient. And that has happened. Now, the good news, not that there's much good news to be taken from cut situation, is that the bus services are now running much more reliably, efficiently. Bus numbers are up, so people are making more journeys now. Interestingly, more people now use the buses than before. So when you look at the individual numbers of people right across our region that use a bus, it's greater than the pre-pandemic, but they're not making as many journeys. And that's because we'll all understand that the changes that have happened using Zoom calls to have business meetings, people working from home, making appointments online rather than going to GP in person, all that technology. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's quite good for the environment in lots of ways. But it does mean that we have new and different challenges to get people using buses. So that's why birthday buses happen, because it's encouraging people to change their behaviour, which is actually starting to happen. Now, you asked about on-demand services. Do I think they're any good? Are they working well? Not particularly. It was always a problem. Now, I remember doing an interview with Claire Kavanagh, the Radio Bristol, and I think she's interviewed you. I think I've heard you being interviewed by her, and lots of other people have been interviewed by her. She's very good. I did when the launch came. She talked to me, and she actually commented. She said on air, "You don't seem terribly trying to sell this or enthusiastic about it." And the reason was because I was aware that we had a shortage of bus drivers for that service at the very outset. And that was a major problem. So what I was very anxious about was not raising expectations that couldn't possibly be fulfilled. Because although the companies that bid for these things always promise you they're going to get the drivers, of course, when it comes into the delivery phase, you find that they're a bit short. And that is true. The bus driver shortage has impacted hugely. I think we've messed up as well on some of the zones. I think the zones have been the wrong shape and wrong size. I had very strong views at the beginning when I talked to my officers. They felt differently. They're experts and have knowledge that I don't have. So I've listened carefully to what they said. But I have to say that in the round, I still think that some of the points I made are more valid than ever. So we constantly review that to make it work better. And it's interesting that the on-demand services are working in different ways in terms of effectiveness and success in different parts of the west of England. And that shouldn't be surprising, really, because all our communities are quite different, equally as important, but quite different. So what changes need to happen? Well, we need to keep reviewing the areas. I think we need to work out a way that we can make sure that we get these on-demand services able to go to places like hospitals, where they're not always doing that. And I think that's quite important, actually. Train stations in particular. We still have an issue with Bristol Parkway, but there are other stations too, where that you can't pick up an on-demand service there. And that seems a bit nonsensical to me. So we're trying to deal with all those challenges, but it is quite difficult because the rules the government give us are quite strict, so they can't compete with commercial services in certain ways, for example. So it is quite a challenging thing, but it needs to be better. I think we need to put it in context. There is no on-demand service that makes money anywhere in the country. It is a kind of subsidised service, effectively. The government have asked for innovative and new. That's what we are trying to do. So we need to keep innovating. We need to keep trying to do new stuff. But my view is that it's got potential, but that potential is not yet fulfilled by any means. In fact, it's quite a way off where it needs to be, in my view. I think I covered all. Did I cover all your areas?
Thanks. That was a very full answer. Thank you very much. One just very quick follow-up question. The original BSIP bid compared to what was finally signed off saw a £15 million reduction in the funding of supported bus services. I'm just wondering, did the officers consult you about that reduction to supported bus services before they finally signed it off? Thank you.
Quick answer, please.
Yes. Well, I'll do. Sorry. Yeah, of course. The straight answer is I don't quite understand what your question is, but could you talk to me and I'll send you a written note. Okay, I'm sorry, because sometimes we have discussions and I sometimes think we think we're talking about the same thing and it's something different, and I'm not clear what you're asking me, so I won't give an answer if you don't mind. Thank you. Yes, already underway.
Just following on from Tim's point, really, when DRT was introduced to this scrutiny committee about 3 years ago, it was all about integrated transport, working into bus hubs and transport hubs and that sort of thing. And DRT was never seen as a replacement bus service. Yet that seems to be the way that it's been rolled out, particularly in North Somerset. I mean, there are tales of, there's one guy who goes 8 miles up the 838 into Bristol every day because of the size of the zone on his own. And I see 75% of the buses going around with nobody on them. Sometimes there might be one passenger, very often there might be two. So, you know, is it a fundamental rethink of the way they're working? You know, we need to be getting, DRT needs to be getting passengers onto buses, not replacing the bus service.
You're absolutely right, but it's inevitable in the context of the cuts that people will use the system to meet their needs. We can't blame the public for trying that.
But that's the way that it's been planned in the first place. It hasn't been planned to work into transport hubs.
Yeah, well, I'm not in disagreement about that, because the whole point of it has always been to get people to connect up with the other routes and go relatively short distances. And one of my big reservations at the outset, which I made clear to my officers at the time, was the zones are too big. And I think you're saying that to me as well. I agree. We need to look at that again. But there are good reasons why those zones were considered to be needing to be larger. Because you could theoretically have gone, I think, at one stage from Midsummer Norton all the way over to Portishead, a huge arc, which is nonsensical because that's not connecting you up with the main route. The idea is that you get another bus or another train or something.
It's going back to that phrase again. They're not replacement bus services. They're supposed to be feeder services.
Exactly. But to be fair, politicians of each unitary wanted it to be seen that way because they were having to make cuts because they'd frozen the levy, and they wanted to say, here's an alternative to people. And that's just politics. You just have to accept that.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Yeah, I could ask Dan questions about DRT all morning, but I'll spare you that. And I just want to look at a practical aspect of the way WECA operates. For you to deliver what you have to try and deliver, you're dealing with all manner of providers and with stakeholders and with the local authorities. But as members of scrutiny or other engagement with the authority, we have very little sight of a forward plan that shows us anything that is being dealt with in the foreseeable future. And it's only ever looking one meeting ahead. Now, I believe you and your officers must know what you're dealing with in the next 6, 9 or 12 months. Not for us to hold you to, because things change and mean decisions can't always be taken when you'd like to. But for scrutiny to be effective, it has to know what is coming up so that it can engage with processes well in advance and actually can be useful to you. Can you give us an assurance? You will actually ensure that a meaningful forward plan is prepared and updated regularly so that we can all play a part in this process? And if one, if one went backwards, if you actually had transport levies on that forward plan some time back, proper discussion could have taken place. So actually, I see it. I see the potential for, I don't know why I'm giving Dan help in things he might use it for to get what he wants, but actually, the potential is enormous if it's used, and I can't understand why it's not. You're not alone, because Marvin does exactly the same thing, but it just seems madness.
Well, Jeff, you've been around the block a long time, so you know this is not unique to me or Marvin or other council leaders now or in the past. But look, I do give you an undertaking to do my very best to give you that more period ahead to be able to scrutinise properly, because I'm not fearful of scrutiny, just to be clear. Okay, I welcome scrutiny as long as it's constructive and not, party political and all that kind of stuff. So we will redouble efforts, because you raised this with me before. I remember talking to you about it, and I did follow up and ask officers to try and do that. What you seem to be saying is that has not made a significant difference as yet. The officers are listening as we speak now. I give you an assurance that we will redouble our efforts to try and sort that. And I ask you to keep on me to make sure that we get somewhere with that, because I agree, for the reasons you've given, that you should be able to see ahead, because I think it would be quite useful and helpful. And the whole point is we want things to get better, all of us. I don't doubt, whatever your party, wherever you're coming from, whatever community group you're in, we all want things to be better. What we've got to determine is what is better. What does that look like? And of a list of 10 things that make things better, we may only have money for 7. So which are the 7 of the 10? It's that kind of decision. Okay.
One is, it was very nice to see some financial data on Westlink. Is it possible to obtain performance for the separate zones? In particular, I'd like to see the Keynsham zone, which is a small one, and I think it'll be very interesting to see what the numbers are for that zone. And the second point is it possible for you to arrange a meeting for a resident and myself to discuss with a CA person the rerouting of 522 through the Shandag?
Okay, right. Well, hi, Hal. Look, I think part of the problem with the information provision is this commercial sensitivity, I'm told. Provided it's not commercially sensitive, I'll give you anything. Okay, but there are often those issues. That's why I don't like the whole setup, because to me it's nonsensical. So we will do our best, provided it's not commercially sensitive. And then in terms of meeting with, so what is it you want exactly? You want to meet with an officer, with your constituent and an officer to discuss the Shandag Estates service. Okay, the 522. People are listening. Let me know if that hasn't happened in the next week. You haven't got an appointment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
According to my agenda, we're pretty much done. I don't know if you've got time for one more question, if anyone's got one more question. Right. Yes.
If we are down to specific bus routes, I wonder whether you wish just wait, lose this opportunity.
I would like to try and avoid playing bingo if we can.
I know.
I do apologise.
Yes, this is your fault. But there is a discussion that's happening with, through Fiona Gorley, who is one of the Bath and North East Somerset councillors, about the number 94 bus from Wiltshire, from Trowbridge upwards, which has been very carefully thought through and costed. Wiltshire are happy to pay half. I think this is, I'm not asking you for detail on this, but I know they are desperate to have a conversation with you about that. So please can I put in a bid for Fiona and the 94?
Fiona has presumably asked to meet with me, I guess.
I'm sure she has.
Could you make sure she asks again?
I will make sure she asks again.
Say I said in committee.
Grateful.
I will try and meet with her. Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm going to say thank you very much to Dan for coming, and we'll see you next time.
See you. New Year.
So apparently I'm testing this mic and it sounds like it works. I'm happy to make it next. So let's with apologies to anyone else that's making a statement, we're going to go back to the normal agenda, but I am going to allow that to happen. Yes. So I believe it's Ian. I think you've nominated Bernice to speak.
Thank you. My name is Ian Quaife. I'm from the Bristol Older People's Forum. I'm the development manager. I'm here on behalf of Bristol Older People's Forum, and all these women are members, but they're also here representing the Ashton Vale suffragettes, as they call themselves. And I'm going to ask Bernice from the group to read our statement out, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. My main statement was read out at the Bristol City Council meeting on Friday. I've been asked to keep this short and to the point. We are from Ashton Vale. We are the Ashton Vale suffragettes, which you've probably heard of. We would like to request the ring fencing of a proportion of the CAS funding allocated to WECA via Bristol City Council to be used for the reinstatement of the bus service in Ashton Vale. Local residents believe the savage cuts by First Bus, WECA, agreed by Dan Norris and Bristol City Council, disproportionately affect older and disabled people. It is a scandal, and it is based on discrimination and profit rather than the social and environmental good. Do you know where Ashton Vale is? Do you know how far we have to walk? Bearing in mind that the community is mainly for disabled and elderly residents. There are loads of bungalows down in that area. When we all moved down there, we were told that the buses would stay running. We have had meetings with First Bus, who gave us assurances and promises that when they stopped the 25, that the 24 bus would continue running, bearing in mind the type of community we are. The fact that people are disabled and elderly that live down there. Sorry. We feel we are like a meat in the sandwich. We have First Bus saying it is not viable to run the service down there because it's a single-decker bus. But what do we have at the top of Ashton Drive? A single-decker bus running. We know for a fact that the government has given funding for areas like us to have a bus. It is now a year that we have had no bus. For us to go to the doctors, for me to take my husband just up the road, we have to get a taxi. I have invited Dan Norris and I have invited the managing director of First Bus to come down to Ashton Vale to do the walk that you are expecting people in wheelchairs who use walking sticks to do that walk. And we see running down Winterstoke Road, this Westlink service, and it is 3 buses playing Follow My Leader. They run down Winterstoke Road, they go round a roundabout, and they come back, and they are empty. The 24 bus service, you have 3 buses.
Bernice, can you come to an end?
Sorry.
Yeah.
We have 24 buses at the top of Ashton Drive. Can they not at least run 1 bus down there an hour? That's all we're asking. That's all we had before. It doesn't cost that much money. We've looked at bus firms like Transformer. They are willing to take that bus service over. And I do wonder, and I did ask this at the council meeting, whether in the agreement with First Bus, there is a clause to say that if they stop a certain bus service, then no other company is to take it over. If Dan Norris can afford £10,000 to put his picture on a bus, which would have given us a bus service for 2 months. You see the weather out there. There are residents down in Ashton Vale that can't even go out. I have mentioned a couple before, and I will mention them again because it is heartbreaking. They have early onset dementia, and they used to catch our bus because, as you know, with dementia, they have limited capability. But when they can go places, and it's routes that they are used to. They haven't been able to do that. They have not.
Bernice, I'm afraid there is a time limit, and I'm going to have to ask. Can I ask if you're planning to come on Friday to the meeting on Friday, Ian and Bernice? Yes. Okay, because
we're going to continue this. This is we do believe it's a scandal. We're going to continue. We have to enforce media, build.
So the reason I'm asking, and I am going to be a bit strict here, is that at Scrutiny we receive statements. It's not a question and answer session, and so I'm not going to sort of make an exception. I'm really sorry because I know you've come here today, but that's why I'm urging you, if you can afford it and you can arrange it, that do come to Hanham where there is the chance to ask those questions. If you get them in by 5 o'clock this evening, and then you can actually have. Then there is provision for a question and answer session directly with the Mayor. Okay. I'm going to allow, yes, I'm going to allow this, but I'm not going to make it a precedent. Okay, look, I'm going to allow Mayor Norris an answer, and okay.
Bernice, can I assure you, if I could do something about it and have the funding, I'd do it. You're a very effective lobbyer. You're making a very strong case, and you do it repeatedly. And I take my hat off to you. It's admirable, and I know. And hold on, because I've listened to you, please. And I'm very hold on. And I'm very happy to talk to you. Doug Claringbold and I will meet with you, okay? And we'll have a proper face-to-face. Well, you want to meet Doug Claringbold, I think, as well, because look, these are commercial services. I don't make those decisions. They're commercial. So why don't you meet with me and Doug Claringbold? I hope you agree that's probably a sensible thing to do. What the outcome will be, I don't know, because I have no control over what Doug Claringbold does in that respect. But let's do it, okay?
I think that's a discussion for Bristol City Council.
Yeah, it's a different thing. It is complicated. But look, Bernice, you've made a very strong case. I've heard it. You, me, and Doug Claringbold are going to meet up to discuss it further. Okay.
I think that's a pretty good commitment you've got there. Well done, Bernice. And I would point out to Doug Claringbold that one of those bridges that prevented serving Ashton Vale with a double-decker bus is now gone. An old railway bridge is taken out. So maybe with a tweak to the route, double-deckers buses could indeed get down there. So I've let this run on, and I'm now going to sadly move back to the minutes and the business of the day. Right, back to the minutes. We've got the minutes held on the 8th of September and the 2nd of October, partly because so I'm going to take these separately. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder to accept the minutes of the 8th of September as accurate?
I had a correction to the 8th of September minutes, Mr. Chairman.
And has that been, I thought some changes have been made to the minutes.
No, not as far as I'm aware. There's nothing published in our minute pack for today saying there's any changes made to the 8th of September minutes.
We're going to go back to them. we're going to go back to them, but I did want to have that dialogue between Ashton Vale and I know you're here, Dave, and I will come back to you. Should we? Would you like to propose a correction?
Well, it was to do with the list of public speakers. If you remember in September,
Yeah.
I was not allowed to speak, ruled in by yourself, but on the advice I now understand of the monitoring officer. And I wanted to make sure that was reflected within the minutes, that I was present but was not allowed to speak. Because the minutes at the moment would imply that I didn't even bother to turn up to my own statement.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Item 4 of the minutes records the point. The original minute was saying that you were invited to speak as part of the public forum, but were prevented from doing so. The Chair proposed an amended minute. Councillor Kent was prevented from speaking as part of the public forum, but was invited to speak and present his statement under item 11 of the agenda, which on watching the meeting back is factually accurate. So we've got an original minute and we've got an amendment that you proposed, Chair, and I suggest to dispose of the matter, you just simply put it to the vote and it's either one or the other. Thank you, Chair.
Are you willing to accept that, Tim? Because I think it is fairly accurate, and we have made an effort
I
to
don't
change
waste time, but actually my statement went further than what I could speak to under that agenda item, and that was the point I made. I didn't want to waste time. I don't want to waste time here. I'm more than happy for us to put it to a vote. The key thing is I wanted it recorded. That was the case. I mean, since then I've had further communication with the monitoring officer where he's made it clear, in fact, no councillor may make a statement to any meeting of WECA, which came as a bit of a surprise, to put it mildly.
That's not covered by the minutes. I'm going to suggest that I'm going to ask for a proposer to propose that the minutes are accurate, bearing in mind that we have made an effort to amend them. So would anyone like to propose those?
Sorry,
Yeah.
Just to be clear, because nothing was agreed in October because we were not quorate, are you proposing your amendment to my original? So I originally proposed an amendment. You then proposed an amendment to my amendment. How are you voting on that?
I'm going to suggest that the minutes we have, which have just been read out, are a reasonably accurate reflection of what happened. If we can't, I'm going to look for a proposer and a seconder. If they're not the case, then we'll have to defer this.
Just to be completely clear, you're proposing the minutes as amended by your amendment to my amendment?
Yes. As read out
just
by
so
the
everybody in the room is completely clear on what they're voting on.
as read out by the monitoring officer just now.
I'll be opposing that because I think my original amendment was more accurate.
Does anyone want to propose these minutes as an accurate record? I'm guessing we're going to have to defer these minutes now. Okay, let's defer them and take this offline, Tim. Can we agree that the minutes of the 2nd of October are accurate? Would anyone like to propose those or raise any issues?
I'm happy to propose the minutes of the 2nd of October. It's been
Thank you, Tim.
to the meeting.
Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Alison. So we'll do that, and I'll take away an action to work with you to try and get something that we can both agree with. Okay, so move on to Chair's announcements. Number one is we've heard back from the Mayor, who's happy for the current custom and practice of overview and scrutiny members to observe advisory boards to continue. The next meeting, I've got dates of the next meeting of the Planning, Housing and Transport Board, which is the 19th of February, and the Business and Skill Boards at the 22nd of February. I'd be interested if anyone wants to declare now or possibly after this meeting if they would like to observe those boards on behalf of Scrutiny. So I don't know if there's anyone who's desperate to do that right now, or should we do it by email? Looks like we're doing it by email. Okay. And then secondly, we had a session with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, and I'm going to offer a few brief highlights from my brief highlights from that, and noting that we have an informal meeting in February where we're going to continue thinking about what work we would do with that group. But across the board, not just here, combined authority scrutiny is still maturing, and we stack up reasonably well comparatively in some aspects, but there's room for improvement and the need for continual self-reflection. We need to be very clear about the distinction between scrutiny and audit, and that's something that Jeff and I have been discussing, with audit focusing very much on compliance, risk and control, whereas our role is to assess strategy and how it's translated into practice, which I think we've been demonstrating quite well so far today. Everyone agrees that we need a new constitution, and we need to make sure that we're very clear about the role of overview and scrutiny and audit within it. We're disappointed that so little progress has been made, particularly as there's quite a lot of low-hanging fruit, but maybe we can talk about that during the transformation programme. We need to make sure we're doing overview, not just scrutiny, which is why we're trying to programme in extra meetings which aren't just looking at the paperwork when it's already been published, because that's not really overview. There's a new protocol published in November by the Department for Levelling Up for combined authority scrutiny specifically. And again, we need to do some more work to make sure that we're using that. It's only guidance, but using that as guidance. And I'm very pleased to see that there's a budget proposal in the budget we'll be looking at in a few minutes for an extra scrutiny officer, because of the in order to improve our ability to do this work. So that's really good. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, but that's really just to update you what happened, because we weren't all there. I've got one reminder to the clerk that she is invited to clarify anything for the minutes to make sure we get it right first time. So if I think they're online. Yes, Suzanne is online. So if anyone notices that she's appeared on the screen behind me and wants to clarify things, I'd much rather get things right first time than not. So we've got 8 submitted by members of the public. Written responses have been provided and available on the website. We had 4 statements received. We've had one of those already from Bernice, but Dave, Redwell, I now invite you to make your statement. And again, I'm going to be a little bit stricter this time and try and keep us to the 3 minutes.
Really wanted to make sure everybody's aware that the government issued an instruction and guidance last week to West Midlands Combined Authority, North Somerset Council jointly as the Bus Service Improvement Plan area, and to all other local authorities in England as transport authorities, to rewrite your bus service improvement plan and make a submission to government by the 12th of June to carry out full public consultation with your stakeholders and make sure your plan is compliant with some of the government policies that they've now put forward from the department. And that includes things like community safety, interchanges, connections between DRT and mainline bus services, supported bus services, which are the responsibility of the 4 unitary authorities to fund to the West of England Mayor. The fun and games is going on now with the levies. I sit in the middle of it. We're not giving Dan any more money, so we won't get the services. So let's be absolutely frank. You're playing a political game. I'm just interested in passengers. You can play your political games, but make sure the media will know what's going on. So let's get on to the seriousness of this. We've got 30 communities without public bus services. No, not any other local authorities, combined authorities like that. The only other city that I know about like that is Stoke-on-Trent, and they made massive cuts. Westlink is not a replacement for mainline buses. The mayor said that. I worked on Westlink with him. It was always meant to be a fix into your local supported services, but you froze the levy. That's North Somerset Council froze, Baines froze, Bristol City Council froze, and South Gloucestershire froze. We've had no wiggle room to pay for the vehicles, the staff, the drivers, or to run the services. So we then had to massively cut back the network. Now, what are you going to do this year? Play another political game? Because each of you councils now have the responsibility under the WECA Act by the levy. We should have been discussing about this when we were messing around over having Angel on the side of a bus, which was a waste of public money and time, to quite frank, to passengers anyway. May have pleased a few officers here. But that should have been talking about the levy, because the levy should be paid. It's about 10.235 million from Bristol, 4 point something from South Gloss. Been going through, I've got all the figures. Bristol's cabinet tomorrow going to try and replace that levy with CAS money. That's not in the Act, Chief Executive. Read the Act. It absolutely says it's supposed to be council taxation money passported to WECA, not CAS money from Bristol or Bath, which is short-term money. So they'll go out and tell the electorate we can't have any bus service in Baines or in Bristol or South Gloss. That's because they're not paying the levy, which is in the WECA Act. And the Post and the media need to report that clearly. It is their responsibility and duty to pay the West of England Mayoral Combined Authority in their budgets this year the money to run the public transport network. The WECA Act is what applies. Can we ask Ed? It's sent to every member. Okay, they understand it. So that's the bus thing. That all needs a review and that needs Scrutiny to look at it. On rail, we're paying £35 million for rail services for trains that disabled people cannot get onto on local railway services to Gloucester and Worcester. If you live at Yate, Cameron Dursley, or Ashton for Tewkesbury, these trains, they don't pull in the platforms, so wheelchairs cannot get on them. If a wheelchair passengers get on, they're left in the corridors. It's the same at Bedminster. The Mayor and Malcolm Parsons need to discuss this Department for Transport, and we need to get rid of these IET units off those lines.
Thank you.
Paying for them. So that's
Thanks, Dave.
the point for you there.
And I
Please
noted,
relook at the bus service improvement plan.
and I noted that someone had raised a question about access to the Gloucester service, and there is a response there. Whether or not it satisfies you, I can't say at the moment. I would agree that I'm very concerned, and I think a lot of people are very concerned about the proposal to use CAS money to replace the levy, and I think it's something that needs looking at very carefully about whether or not that's sustainable or proper. And do note that the BSIP plan is the plan, it's not the funding. So the funding will continue and the contract stays in place, but the plan needs to be updated. So thank you. Do we have any other statement? No. Okay, should we move on? So the next on the agenda is the Bus Service Improvement Plan Task and Finish Group report. I'm going to just introduce this and then be interested to hear anyone's views, assuming that you've read the report. So following the 8th of September meeting last year, several areas for closer consideration were identified. As a result, we held 4 meetings of a Task and Finish Group to look at the Bus Service Improvement Plan. And my report, with great assistance, thank you from Alison, was attached to the papers. Firstly, and most importantly, I'd like to thank officers for the quick responses and the hard work to take us through a lot of information, and really appreciated just how rapidly they responded and working after hours. This is the second version that was published after some feedback from officers rather late in the day about some inaccuracies in the original report. These particularly underplayed the hard work that combined authorities officers do to inform and involve the unitary authorities, which I'd like to acknowledge. However, one of the very clear findings that came out is that unitary authorities, especially portfolio holders, are not being sufficiently involved, or not feeling, sufficiently involved. And that feeling is very palpable. It's a key governance issue, and officers recognise and acknowledge this and are considering how to improve this key issue. Unitary officers also need to consider how to make sure their portfolio holders are kept informed. Concerns were expressed about the birthday buses, and that is something that is covered by the report. And I'm concerned that there's an assertion that the uplift in passenger numbers is attributed to the birthday buses, and I don't think that is something that can be proved. And it certainly seems that, at least in terms of applications, if not use, the birthday buses are benefiting the top 10% of the socio-economic status a lot more than the bottom 10%, which is of concern to me. We also looked at Westlink. It's currently under much needed review, and I hope that Scrutiny will be kept abreast, writing if needed, and ward members is consulted especially about the legally required boundary reviews following a ruling by the Traffic Commissioner, including in places like Ashton Vale that have lost their service, but also, for example, the boundaries in North Somerset that Mike was talking about. So I'd like to invite any comment from the committee or about the contents of the report.
Just a brief one. Can I just thank you, Chairman, for getting this report together and getting it to the committee. Can I also thank the officers actually for their engagement with us on it. I realise it was sort of a private forum, but they were very open, frank and honest with us throughout the process, which really helped sort of then dig through sifting sort of fact from belief, and also being able to really get down to the nitty-gritty of where the issues were. I mean, it's quite clear from this that there are challenges within the BSIP delivery. There is also serious questions over the demand responsive transport, how effective it is, and whether or not actually it's even going to be possible to turn it around because of the timescales that are involved, and of course, obviously contracts that are involved. But I would like to thank the officers for their aid to us and for you for producing the report.
Jeff.
Yeah, I just want to really a number of points, but yeah, thank you, Ed, for pulling this together. Interesting that the audit committee was looking at aspects of this as well from a governance and decision making point of view, and a lot of the issues overlapped, even though we were looking at different aspects of it. One point I wanted to make, the Ashton Vale comments, we do need to recognise the costs to our constituent authorities of isolation. And that isolation happens in my relatively affluent ward, where people cannot travel the distance to a bus stop to get to the facilities they need to stop them being isolated. Now, as an authority, the combined authority ought to actually be looking at what costs could be saved to the constituent local authorities if we're able to reduce that amount of isolation and actually keep those residents fit and well for longer. And I think this is something where we've got to have some joined up thinking. The wider issues in terms of the business service improvement plan, I would question whether we have identified the measures by which we will judge success of strands of the proposals that we're bringing in. Because having seen the figures, it didn't look to me like success, but we hadn't set criteria which judged it. And deciding what you determine is success after the event or after the figures have started coming in is not good practice. You should be determining that beforehand. Circumstances might change and figures might be interpreted differently, but whether it's a capital or a revenue project, we need to be identifying what success will look like and how we will judge it and how we will convince our funders that actually we've succeeded, it's achieved what we set out to do. So I think there is a very fundamental aspect of how we prepare our reports if we're going to recognise that and deliver. And for me, I think we should be saying to officers, we don't actually expect every report to come out online in being a thriving success. We're innovating, we're doing things differently. Some of them aren't going to work. But that makes it all the more reason why we need to establish those criteria before we start getting results in. So I just think that's a wider issue that needs to be applied to BSIT, but also other new funding that we may get and hopefully will get in the years ahead.
Mike, then Hal, I think.
Just a quick one, just to say thank you for the report, and just to back up what you said, I was asked to raise the issue about the lack of communication between local authorities and WECA, and obviously you brought it up in there, which is great.
The section on decision making, I think we did hear something last week about a working group that was going to make tough decisions. And I wondered if it was possible through you, Chair, to ask the Chief Executive if he could comment on the membership of that working group.
And I think my point has been as well, my ward is affected and I've heard nothing about any changes or any review of the boundaries or operating. And I think it's something that both actually directly affected ward members, but also those such as Ashton Vale ward members where there is no bus service could well do with being at least informed as to what decisions are being made and when. It looks like we're not the chief executive's maybe not ready to answer that question now, so maybe we can take that offline.
Yeah, no, look, I'm happy to take it offline. Is it the levy? Which working group are you talking about, Hal? Just so I'm really clear. Right. Okay. Sure. All right. Okay. Yeah. So look, the way and if this is around the broader supported bus services route. So we have just internally from the officer side, we have an infrastructure director who meets every month with the infrastructure directors of the unitary authorities that we work with, and they take papers through that group on a regular basis. So those meetings do take place, and the infrastructure director were here this morning. And he's got one of his team here. Those meetings take place. I've seen them. I've been to some of them as well, really. So there is no doubt that those conversations do take place. I think there is what we're talking about here is that there are aspects of the bus services improvement plan that we are going to take a review back to our through our own management team at the end of this month to look at the demand responsive transport services, the DRT service, the Westlink service that we're talking about, to also look at aspects of the birthday buses and other issues as well, to bring that back. Once we've done that internally ourselves, just to get how things are doing, what's going well, what isn't, and let's be clear, there'll be a mix of those things. Then we'll come out and we welcome the mayor's commitment to having those conversations through the transport advisory forum, planning of transport and housing advisory forum that we had, because we can take and get feedback from those as well. My personal view is we've got to drop down even further than that. The best information we will get will be from ward councillors and from local residents, and those who take a huge interest in the subject matter about making sure we use the money wisest. It has to be collectively done. There are a number of players in this. The mayor's given a good and really clear explanation of how the funding works, but I think the public, to a large extent, won't be hugely interested. What they're interested in is what is the service that they get on, how the mechanisms of the funding work is really for us to get right and get the best value we can out of. But it is a complex funding environment, as he said. You will see, at your own council meetings, and it's not for me in any way to comment on the recommendations or the decisions that the individual unitary authorities will make. That is not my job. But you will see at the moment we are assuming flat cash again in the budget for 2024-25 on the supported bus services issue. The mayor made it clear we do not have a precepting right. We are the only combined authority in that position, one of the 10. So that is an issue. That's as originally set up in 2017. Equally so, we have no decision-making power on the levy. Those are matters decided by the individual councils. So if they decide to increase them, that is all well and good. I have to say there are further complications down the road, though, because the market's got to be able to respond to that. So having buses and bus drivers, the private sector isn't going to sit there with an abundance of resource waiting for a funding decision that may or may not come. They need that certainty as well. So even if a decision were taken to make an increase, there would inevitably be a period of time before we could get the response from the private sector on it as well. But we will do it as officers initially, and then we'll take it out wider. We have a good advisory board already that we can get some advice from, but I do think we probably have to go a bit further than that to all councillors as well.
Alison.
Can I just respond to that? Because I found my notes on the meeting that Hal's referring to, so I can now remember how that came about, which is what we were talking in general terms about looking for ways to support the rural communities. It's an enormous challenge. We need a debate on this. So the idea was to set up a working party, which I think you used the expression MAUG, a members and officers working group. So I think that's where that came from. So I suspect that's what Hal has in mind, and you've outlined in more general terms how that might be achieved. So we're grateful for confirmation on that.
Yeah, so we are going to do this in another area. So we're subject to the committee's decision on Friday. It's not my job to make the decisions. We will make the recommendations to the committee. So I would never fetter the committee's decision making on Friday. But we are proposing to introduce a member officer working group, and the membership of that can be decided on. And we're doing that for Bristol Temple Quarter, given the scale of it, given the importance of it, given the breadth of what it means, not just for Bristol, but actually regionally and nationally. Its importance in housing numbers and affordability. Those member officer groups, we're certainly very open to do those across a range of different things, because I think collectively we will get a better decision. Challenging as some of those meetings might well be, but constructive challenge is a good thing in my view. So we'd be happy to have those member officer working groups in different areas as well.
Very quickly, any other questions or any other comments about this? Alison, and the other question maybe that Jeff, you might just want to think about is what other measures of success we might like to start considering, and how we might feed that in. Probably not right now. We don't want to be thinking aloud right now, but maybe an action we could collectively take about what measures of success, wider measures of success, we might like to suggest.
Just on that, I mean, hindsight's always a wonderful thing in terms of identifying that. But you passed comment, and I think members were shocked at seeing that those benefiting from DRT may well have been less in need of benefit than possibly the Ashton Vale ladies that we heard from. And so it seems to me that before we start anything, we have to think about what we're trying to achieve, what the aim is, and how we can measure that. And hearing, and I accept it was one-off, but hearing of a commuter who was using DRT for a very lengthy daily commute, that wasn't the sort of person we should be aiming for. Now, it may be one-off, and it may be that proves the others are justified, but it's how do we identify that? We won't be capable of measuring all those things, but we do need to be able to satisfy ourselves that we're achieving a result in the demographic area that we're looking to achieve, not simply for those who are most IT aware and most able to think of how to exploit the system. So I suppose it's that challenge. We've had some good innovative ideas, but we need to predetermine the measurements, because I think for me, some of the figures I saw on DRT, I felt someone should have been looking at and asking questions a lot earlier than we were asking questions, because the questions became apparent to me, would have been apparent very early on if I had seen that information. So it's that aspect that I think we've got to develop our capacity. And I recognise that's officer capacity, but I think it may also be some political input on the grounds that members have a different view, not least because members represent those strands that are asking for better services. So it therefore can produce a more positive response and possibly allow things to be tweaked sooner.
Alison, then Mike. No, okay, Mike.
Just a quick one. One of the things missing, it seems to me, from the Westlands performance data is the number of passengers on each ride. To me, that's a fundamental measurement of how successful the buses are, and it's completely missing from the data.
And I think
Can I-
actually, for me, there's a qualitative thing here, which is about number of rides not fulfilled, or number of unmet, the amount of unmet demand, or rides not completed, and so on and so forth. So
The lack of time, they're driving around empty.
yeah,
Can I just add, with you mentioning that, I'm embarrassed to admit, as someone who looks at figures a lot, that I looked at the figures and thought, oh, those numbers look quite good. And then I worked out how many it was a week, and then I worked out how many it was a day. And once I did that, I was actually 400 people a day out of a population of the west of England. That didn't seem to me to be as well targeted as I'd like. So that was the thought process. And yes, we need information so we can challenge from that point of view.
So my point is just a sort of minor but quite important process point, really, which is that this has been an incredibly useful exercise, this task and finish group on BSIP, because none of those of us who've been involved, many of us had very little information about it before. And I echo the thanks to the officers who gave up a lot of time, as at the end of the day, literally carrying their laptops out of the building as it was being shut down around them while we're finishing off the meetings. So thank you, that was really helpful. But what is important is that this document is the results, if you like, and then the ongoing work, obviously. But it's really important that we get this report right. And it has a summary of the meetings and what happened, and then a summary of what took place and the criticisms and decisions and suggestions and all the rest of it. Could I please ask that next time we have a task and finish group, that we timetable in the officers' contribution to that in time for the authors of the report to have a chance to look at it before it goes public, which did not happen this time. I think that's all I need to say. Thank you.
I think that's a point very well made, and I think that's lessons learned, that we need to get that right. Yeah. I think so. That's one next step, is sort of timetables, and I think the next step is there's actually some things that we need to, I'll make sure that we now, if we're going to agree this report, with the addition particularly of what does success look like and what sort of measures should we be applying, and some of the comments that Richard's made, I think we just make sure that can we accept this report, and then try and make sure that the next steps are followed up, and we along with the things that we've just minuted. Is that okay? Yep. So I'm seeing no one wants to disagree with that. So okay, thank you. Should we program in an update at our next meeting? Maybe separate from matters, whether as matters arising or as a separate update. Okay. Would people like a short comfort break? Not an adjournment, just a short comfort break, just to, or should we plough on? Because it's quite a long meeting we've got. We've got another, what have we got? Hour and 10 minutes to go. So would 5-minute comfort break? Okay. Just to be clear to the people doing the IT, this is not an adjournment. It's just a brief pause so people can get comfort. considered by the West of England Combined Authority Committee and Joint Committee on the 26th. Reports were published on January the 18th, and I'm going to suggest that we start with the budget. That's the last, but possibly last paper in the report, but I think a good place to start, not least as last week on Monday, the 15th of January, there was an informal meeting of the OVB and Scrutiny Committee, to which audit members were invited and also attended and commented, and we were supported by officers to look in detail at the proposed budget for 24-25. I'd like to thank officers for that, because it's the first time we've actually, making the time, but it's the first time we've been able to look at papers a bit more in advance than just 3 or 4 days before the meeting and after they've been published. So it's the first time we've been able to do that, and actually it's worth saying that a few tweaks have been made to the paper as a direct result of our feedback. So that's nice to see that we've actually had some influence in the drafting of the paper rather than just commenting on it. So my summary comments from that meeting are as follows. Basically, that the paperwork is much better. It's much more streamlined and significantly reduced in volume. And I'd like to thank the officers for making it a little bit more accessible. The key issues that we focused on in particular were staffing and inevitably buses and the budgets for those. There's a real concern about the levy and the financial gap that's opening up. Especially as the cost of bus services has jumped by 40%, but we've only got 2% inflation built into the contract. And as the gap opens up, the BSIP funding will also come to an end. So we're heading towards a really difficult position. So next year, there's balanced budget, but as things move forwards, really difficult decisions to make. So I'm going to open it up now for comments and questions and discussion, whether you were at the meeting last week or not. Would anyone like to go first? Tim.
Well, I had a very, very narrow question, and I don't actually know if it is in the budget, but a resident has raised with me a concern that they have been told that WECA is going to cut the use for disabled bus passes for buses from community transport. Is anyone aware of this? Has this crossed anyone's desk? They were not 100% sure themselves, but they did work in the area, so it wasn't just sort of a rumour from the street. And they wanted me to raise it to find out what's actually going on.
And if that's in the budget, it's probably buried deep within some of the proposals.
Yeah,
so,
unfortunately, that is in the
yeah.
budget. That will be quite a hidden line. So I don't even know if it'd be a WECA or a Bristol City Council issue.
I've seen a couple of officers right at the back standing up now. Is that you'd like to come and address that issue directly? Meanwhile, if anyone wants to catch my eye about any other questions about the budget, then please do so. So welcome, Malcolm and Phil. Very specific budget question there about diamond passes.
Thank you, Chair. First, Councillors, first time I've heard the issue. Not completely aware of it. So any further information you've got, by all means, share it with us. We'll take it away. But
that's fine. I will look deeper into this and find out. I mean, it may not even be WECA, it may not be true, but they raised it with me and they were a source connected to the issue, and they just had a concern. So I'll go back to Bristol City Council also to find out if it could be coming from there. But it's very particular to just community transport. I'll look into it. Thanks.
thank you.
So no one. Tim.
Well, I wanted to follow up a point made by the mayor then. He talked about if councils were to increase their transport levy, on what more could be done. So I guess my question maybe to the officers would be, if councils were to increase their transport levy, say by 20%, how would you spend that? Or would you expect the the local authorities to come forward with proposals how to spend that. How do you actually agree to, I guess, the mechanism for agreement of an expenditure if there was an increase in the transport levy, as appealed for earlier by the Mayor?
I'm assuming that's going to be the citizens panel, isn't it? Which is coming up in February, which has a single question, which is how do we make decisions about what buses to support? Maybe there's more to it.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's the citizens panel really is around looking at the how you would try and prioritise different services. Are the communities strong, or is it about commerciality of those services? So that's what that is. As far as if there was an additional budget that came forward as part of the levy, then those discussions would ultimately come to committee for approval. So the officers would work through with officers in the UAs to identify the best way to spend that additional budget, be it on additional bus services or funding tickets or whatever it may be. So
thanks. I mean, that sounds like the correct procedure to me. I'm just wondering, because obviously we get a lot of representations here, particularly from the Ashton Vale community. So if Bristol City Council was to increase its transport levy, but specify specific areas they wanted to see services put in place, I presume that wouldn't be binding, but be more of an ask of WACA.
absolutely, and we would then look at what's the best way to deliver that. Would that be an extension to an existing service or the provision of a new service? And we'd work with the officers within Bristol City Council, for example, to identify the best way to bring that forward.
I mean, they're really important questions, aren't they? The budget paper, and it's in sections 33 and 34, 35 really are the sort of key areas where 30 and goes beyond that. Some of the suggestions really. So when we had quite a lot of challenges, particularly for that, which services we could fund in particular for this year. You know, the Mayor's already quite rightly talked about the inflation number. From a year ago in bus services, that was that figure from a year ago that sat in that sort of mid-30s to mid-40s%, depending on which area you looked at. It's important to say that the inflation number is not as high as that going forward. So when we relate the contractual sum in at 2.5, that is obviously in at a much different place going forwards, not and shouldn't be measured against that 40% that we talked about previously. One of the tests that is applied, and we do sit down and work through with the unitary authority officers, as been said, as to which bus services we have. But it is a regional approach overall, and there are lots of benefits from having a regional approach in terms of the the value that you get from a contract. The private sector, when it's bidding for a bigger area, will give you better value. But also, it isn't so much about in those individual conversations. They play in, as you said, Tim, more of an ask, but it's an influential ask, clearly, because there's the funder behind it as well. But the cost per passenger journey is a significant value for money indicator that is used by ourselves and by the unitary authority officers in making those decisions. And councils have really difficult decisions to make across funding, adult services, children's services, special educational needs, transport, and the list goes on. And those challenges are difficult against the funding environment that exists. And supported bus services are one of, and the levy that the councils vote on are one of those balancing aspects that they have to make the decisions across. Those are not easy decisions to make, but clearly if there's an increase in the levy and the councils were to put an increase in, we would work up which services were best across a range of options, not just including value for money, but also the impact it would have, the broader impacts that were talked about as to which services that should be funded. But some of those cost per passenger journey numbers are very, very high, higher than it would be to even provide to pay for a cab service in some of those instances. And those are the ones that get incredibly expensive for us and are the difficult decisions. So I understand the challenges around the levy decisions that are made, but those decisions are made ultimately by the councils which you are representatives of, and will vote on in the budgets at those councils.
Alison.
It's slightly more kind of global oversight point, if you like. But we spent a lot of time talking about BSIP, and it's great that it got the money in. And I know there's a lot of work going on. You've got your number of reviews all going on about how to make DLT work better, and that will all come back to us in other streams. But my more global question, which sort of follows on slightly from what Tim's just asked, is that BSIP now is going to go on until 2025. Presumably you have a plan. Do we have a plan as to whether or not there are other fundings that can be applied for, or what? It feels at the moment like we all drop off at the end of a cliff, having done an enormous amount of work, and hopefully have got something that's more useful by the end of 2025. But is there some sort of more long-term plan about either going back to government for money, or showing how marvellously we've done with the money that there is, and/or making a plan for what do we do if there is no more government money, about what will be a substantial part of the bus offering in Weka?
Yeah, so in some ways, having the money that's for a few years in some of our streams is actually quite a luxurious position. The last 6 years have seen annual settlement, 1 year settlements on the funding of and the grants that come in, particularly to local government and particularly to us. And in some ways, having a bus services improvement plan that originally was running for 3 years and originally would have finished at the end of March 2025, being extended for a year is helpful. There isn't any indication currently from government that they will do anything further down the line. And the idea of the bus services improvement plan monies was that we would find a way to make things commercially viable when that money ended. Government extended it out for a further year. We actually wrote to government. What happened was that there were a number of rule changes made as to what the money could be used for. 14 months into a 36-month programme, the government indicated, and this is helpful and presents its challenges, that we could extend the use of that monies into supported services, which was originally not allowed in the bus service improvement scheme. So it was a change that was made 14 months into a 36-month programme. So that meant we needed a period of review on what we were doing, and also looking at ways to ask the government, and we did, and government responded really positively, which was helpful, to allow us an additional year. That isn't across the board, by the way. So it is an extension of a year for some aspects of the programme, but explicitly excludes any fares initiatives being extended for a year. So we could extend demand responsive transport. We could extend into the new area around supported services, but it will run out. So this is more about getting things commercially viable. We don't have any. There are no announcements currently that I'm aware of anyway for bus services improvement further monies, but then that would make sense because the original idea was to get things commercial so that they could stand on their own 2 feet. That is the big challenge here. Ultimately, if you go back to why we're dealing with these issues, we're dealing with issues because there are not enough people on the buses for us to make them commercially viable. That is why supported services exist over and above the commercial offering that the bus companies apply at the moment. So this is where it doesn't work for the shareholders, and the public sector has to step in. We will see, if we're given £10 million, we'll spend 10. If we're given 12, we'll spend 12, and we'll do it in the best possible way, working with the unitary authorities to provide the best possible service. It does go much broader. Councillor Gollop made the point earlier on about this is about, if you've got to look at the whole life costs and the whole life costs of an individual, by getting people out, and they're helpful both for their health and the economy. So it goes even broader again when you start to look at the benefit of the services.
Did you want to come back on that, Alison? Okay. I mean, I do note that in the budget there is some leeway. They're making some assumptions about the bus market recovering and therefore concessionary fares becoming a higher cost. And at the moment, we're actually exploiting the fact that the concessionary fares is coming in under budget in order to subsidise or support some of the bus services. So I think there's some leeway in there, but it's nice to see some optimism that we're seeing in a recovery of the bus market. So that's a good start. I think the other thing that this committee might tell me if I'm overstepping the mark, but might want to suggest that some more demand reduction measures are put in place in order to raise revenues in order to support bus services. But that's a wider, longer term thing, and something that maybe the Combined Authority, along with the unitaries, want to think about. We're not having a hugely animated discussion about this, so what I may put in my feedback to the main committee is that two of the other issue that came up particularly is the increased amount of staffing cost. And there was some questioning about whether or not all of those posts were needed. I think Ben and Jeff took that line of questioning. And I think, but I'd like to test the committee, that we were fairly convinced that the size of the Combined Authority and the amount of staff now does warrant a better corporate centre to cover things like health and safety and making sure that we adhere to all of our legal duties and we run the organisation well. And at the moment, if you look at some of the benchmarks, the corporate centre is really quite under-resourced compared with the number of staff we have in the Combined Authority. I don't know if anyone's reflected on those since last week and would want to make comments. Ben.
So my line of questioning from last week was not so much focusing on are the 75 extra staff necessary. It was more so thinking about, can we achieve that within a year? So we did get confidence, I think, on Monday of last week that there was some thought to mobilisation of these staff, bringing them on board, and that they would all be necessary, especially when they were placed in areas of like commercial and procurement, the PMO functions, when some of the reporting was saying that they weren't getting the right information out of different parts of delivery and trying to strengthen all that together and start harmonising all these dashboards idea. So I quite liked all of that. My line of questioning on Monday was really focusing on what's achievable with actually obtaining 75 additional FTEs in this budget in the areas that you have said you need them. Just thinking about the market, it seems a bit challenging at the moment to get people, and whether you actually achieve that in the financial year will be very interesting to see.
Yes, I think we were assured, weren't we, that actually the budgets have been phased in, or the extra staff have been accounted for budget-wise, because it's not all going to happen on day one.
Absolutely. So finance and HR have worked together to make sure that we have plans for profiled over the whole year for the recruitment of the staff. It's important to note as well that where possible, we are going to work with the UAs to see if there are any opportunities for filling those resource gaps from perhaps roles that might be available or excess within the UAs. So we'll be looking there as well for recruitment, and particularly so we're not treading on toes in terms of hiring. Also, just important to note, since we had the informal session, we have included the information about which of those are project funded and which are not as well in Appendix 4. So that was one of the changes that Councillor Plowden referred to that we made as an update to the report since you saw it. Thanks.
So I'm going to suggest that that's something that we support and we note, but also that last year there was a 10% staffing cap budget cap put on the staffing, and that was absorbed and been managed. And I think we would support that not being imposed again this year. And I'd quite like to make an overt statement to that to the committee if everyone's all right with that. The other thing that is a personal bugbear of mine is that for the last 3 years in the Treasury Management Report, we've heard that the environmental, social and other considerations are not well enough advanced for us to take any notice of them in the way we manage the Treasury. Given that we're actively investing in measures using our grant and other funding to try and reduce carbon and achieve other things, the fact that we're not building that into the Treasury management, we may be actually investing in things that actively prevent ourselves from doing that. Given that the pension fund, which is one of the largest providers or entities in the region, is now making quite strong efforts to sort of move in towards that direction. I'd like to think that for the 3 years saying it's not well enough developed, we really need to be making some movement on that, and the very welcome carbon accounting that we're going to be bringing in should be applied to the Treasury management as far as possible as well. So would it be all right, would members be okay if I mentioned that as well as part of feedback to the committee? Great. Should we move on? Should we wrap up the budget then and move on to the next thing, which I'm going to go back to the beginning of the agenda now. So the next thing is the Bristol Temple Quarter Regeneration Programme, and I'm wondering if anyone, thank you, has any comments or questions about that. Jeff.
Mine is only a general comment. The general principle of taking it forward positive with. I keep asking questions about homes for Bristolians, actually wanting to know, and I can't really ever get that answer, is are they going to be affordable by people who live in the area? The problem with housing in the Bristol area is that those who work in the lowest paid jobs can't actually afford to live in the city, so they then have to travel further at more cost to get to the work that they need and the city needs them to do. And I'm just keen to know that that is covered somewhere and we're not seeing a large number of expensive properties coming on the market. I accept there's got to be a mix, but I'm keen to know that we are directing this at where the demand is likely to be.
Is that potentially a part of a wider question, which is exactly how the accountability flows? And if there is sort of disagreement amongst the board members, how the sort of local democracy interacts with two national government quangos to make those decisions. And I think within your particular question, it's how the viability is going to be assessed, because we see a lot of things coming through where we're not getting the numbers of affordable we want because of viability. Are we going to be bound by the usual viability rules? Because they do seem to be tilted away from affordability.
Yeah, and I'm asking in the context that whether it's Bristol or whether it's WECA, both mayoral authorities with significant amount of power with the individuals, and as a backbench councillor, I don't really get any say in that process, and I'm just wanting assurances that we've got it right and it's going to deliver what is needed for the people who need that accommodation the most.
So, number of different bodies involved in it, and therefore you're going to get, an answer that will try and bring some of that to life, really. So the 95 million pounds of grant funding was provided to the West England Combined Authority by Homes England, which is the government's house building body that sits as part of DLUC, part of the Department for Housing, Levelling Up and Communities. So that's where the 95 million transfer down, and we are deferring that out across a range of areas, particularly around the eastern, southern and northern entrance of the railway station. There's some fantastic work going on in that area to change the whole gateway to the city. The 4 partners involved, and 3 of those are landowners, are Homes England are both grant funder and landowner. Bristol City Council, the largest landowner in that aspect. There's a number of private parcels of land as well, and Network Rail also own some land. We have a proposal to fund the organisation, the joint delivery team, to try and run this programme, which, as I said, is the joint second biggest in the country today. Incredible programme, with an impact on the economy of 1.6 billion a year, which is something like, when we get it running, which is something like circa 4%. So the numbers are enormous: 10,000 homes, 22,000 jobs. This is an incredibly large scheme. Huge interest, including having some very senior operatives from Homes England. The chief executive himself sits on the board. That's how important it is to them, both for Bristol, for the region, and frankly nationally as well. There are a range of principles we're looking at. Included within that, if I come to the question, is around that affordability issue. We know that the multiplier, and I'll get these as accurate as I can, are probably somewhere in the region of 8 to 10 times. Earnings ratios are very high, and therefore affordability is difficult in the region. It's even more difficult in Bath, particularly the city centre area as well. So it is a big issue for us. We've also got to get a scheme that works both for the public sector, the affordability aspects, but also the private sector as well. So the land values are going to be really important, and making sure that we get a scheme that's commercially works, but the public sector also gets a good share of how things work in the land values and the sums of money that will be gained from that, from the houses that are sold as well. So it's really important we get the balance right. One of the things we will be looking at is how, and government's done some really good things around the the financial instruments work they do, the affordability, things like Help to Buy schemes, and they are mixed. There are pros and cons to government intervention in those schemes, but there are an awful lot of people who couldn't have afforded their homes were some of those schemes not in existence. And we will, and we are working with Homes England to work out are there products, particularly around not necessarily Help to Buy, which is now finished as a government scheme or finished at the end of March, but there are Rent to Buy schemes. There are schemes where you can buy a percentage of your house and then I'll use the terminology staircase up. So you might buy 20%, then you might, when you can afford it, buy another 20 and so on. So there are different schemes that we can look at to help with affordability, and all of that will be in the mix. But it's early days on where we're at. But those are the aspects of work that we're looking at to help with that affordability, particularly in the region. There are some aspects that are not in our control. Planning decisions are quite rightly our party to the planning service of Bristol City Council. It's not my job to fetter those, and they will, there are affordability targets, if you like, that exist in terms of number of affordable homes, and we will work in that sphere. But we need to create something that works through our joint delivery team, that works for the private sector as well, because otherwise we won't get good enough bids in to actually get these homes built. So we've got to get that balance right. But affordability is a big issue of conversation that we're having, and we are talking to Homes England about the kinds of products that could exist, and making sure that there is a mature debate about how we fund some of those.
So Ed, I'm probably just giving officers a warning that I'm sort of on this how do we measure success sort of bandwagon, and I'm just flagging up that 10,000 homes and 22,000 jobs sounds fantastic, but it has to produce. Well, we need to know how we measure that, and are we putting in measures of the demographics and the nature of that housing, or are we just saying, yep, 10,000 homes and we don't mind how expensive they are? I think there has to be a recognition of what it brings to the city, and I think I would rather see, if it was possible, it bringing slightly less value to the city, but more affordable homes would be my preference for what the wider Bristol community needs. So can we just build that up, but can we also work out what measures we might be using to judge how we perform? This is such a massive investment, as the report says, all the more reason why we need to be working out outcomes and how we measure them.
And is that something that can be baked into the legal inter-authority agreement that's proposed? To actually say the measures of success aren't just this. Is that something that can be put in there, or is that really just about how the thing runs? Because if it's only about the way it functions and not about what success looks like, then we're always going to be playing catch up, aren't we, Jeff?
Yeah, look, we at this stage we aren't at the stage of trying to bake things into the some of the legal agreements. We are subject to the committee on Friday, where I hope we get the support to, we're going to be doing a couple of things really. One is we're going to set up this joint delivery team. Secondly, we're going to, towards the end of February, early March, I would expect, or in March, I'd expect us to launch the procurement to go out and get a major developer for the scheme. And I think the points that Councillor Gollop makes are well made. I've had them made by our Metro Mayor, but Dan Norris as well, about dealing with that affordability issue within the region, and homes for people who live within the region is an important point, which we are, which we're very alive to. I've heard it made in a number of places now, not just here today as well. The other aspect, connected to that is, 22,000 jobs. It's important as many of those jobs are for people within the region as well. That is not to say we can't put the borders up. We can't stop people coming in to the region doing those jobs, and there is a wider economy as well. But we're very alive to it. Our Metro Mayor has certainly made some very clear statements to me about the importance to him, as have some members of the committee today and others, that affordability for people who live in the region is really a significant key issue. I come back though to there may well be a range of products and offers on those homes about how do you staircase through ownership in a way, because it is a significant issue, not just for the younger generation either.
The issue I thought maybe Baines and South Gloss members might be interested in is in setting this up, there is some exposure to risk for WECA, for the combined authority. And I would imagine that we will want to see regular reports to ensure that that exposure to risk is not leaking beyond, then affecting South Gloucestershire and Baines. But I guess that will be just business as usual, kind of monitoring and operations and risk management.
Look, I mean, there are. This is as I say, the scale of the scheme is incredibly large, and therefore having people who have worked on and dealt with those sorts of schemes in our organisation is really important for us. So that we are very alive to how these things work. That's also why it's really important that we work closely with Homes England to actually take the scheme forward, and we've had tremendous support from them through the Department for Housing, Levelling Up Communities. It's been very useful in having them to back us up. But there are absolutely there are wider risks. There's a legal section within the report which I'm fortunate enough to have the monitoring officer here if anyone wants to understand some more of that. But let's be really clear, this is going to be of such significance that there are going to be lots of twists and turns and bumps on the road. This is a 20-year programme in developing 10,000 homes. It also works into the St Philip's Marsh, into the flood zone work that we're doing as well. We're working, largely Bristol Council leading that, but we are also part funder in some of the work around the flood zone work as well. Because if we build the homes, we've got to make sure the flood zone aspects work as well. So this is a scheme that goes into the narrow BTQ, big as it is in its own right, into broader areas as well. But there are risks around to it. The easiest thing in the world is to do nothing, isn't it? But I'm afraid that isn't going to deliver the homes the region needs. So we've got to go into it. It is really good that government is confident enough to give us that 95 million. As the mayor said earlier, government has choices about where it puts its money, and it has future choices about where it puts its money. So it's really important that we are all really close and working on this scheme really well. It is an area where we do want a member officer group, because we want to make sure that we are getting the right steers even from that non-decision making member officer group ahead of us going to committee, in addition, because they can get into a bit more detail perhaps than we would get time to do here at this individual committee.
Casey.
I was just formulating, essentially my question's been answered by what's just been said. I just wanted to reinforce, I do think that the story of public engagement is just going to be so vital here. There's talk, obviously, in the paper about briefings, but I think as we go along with councillors, so, councillors across the city, councillors across the region, community groups, Scrutiny, whoever it might be, we've just completely got to get this right so that people feel their input, which will undoubtedly evolve as the, you know, as you said, 20 years, things could change a huge amount during that period, that their input's being heard. I mean, it is mentioned in this risk section about reputation and a clear and consistent communication and engagement plan, but in particular, also from an equalities EDI point of view, I mean, you've got very, you know, high deprivation parts of the city right next door. So aside from fantastic affordable homes and outcomes, it would be great if we can ensure the process is, you know, really delivering on that on that inclusion and is being communicated so that, you know, we don't fight a rearguard action after the event where people are saying.
I'm going to suggest, in the interest of time, that that's something we note in our feedback to the committee. And I think it's a point very well made, and no need to respond to it for now, because I think that that's something that you're trying to bake in. If I'm keen to try and get onto the rest of the committee agenda.
Yeah, it's only a question. The exempt documents, do the scrutiny members get to see those? Do you get to see it as chair of scrutiny? In our individual authorities, we have a process for backbench members still having access to that documentation, and I'd just like to clarify what it is in this situation.
Yeah, happy to take that offline to have a discussion about why you might want to see that. If it was part of an active scrutiny, then yes, absolutely. But for the time being, it's on a you know, a need to know basis, and the committee members themselves obviously need to know because they've got the decision coming through. But if you want to have a discussion about why scrutiny members or audit members might want to see that, I'm more than happy to have that conversation for you. So it's not a no, I just need to understand some more. That's all right.
It's probably just me being perverse, and I don't actually have, I don't have the time to do it justice, but okay. I do think offline there needs to be a discussion, because no information should be totally exempt, because we don't know whether we need to scrutinise it if we don't see it. So absolutely. I just wonder whether we need that discussion to establish a principle going forward. So perhaps we can schedule that. Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to move us on, if that's okay. We've got several things left on the agenda. Could you, does anyone want to indicate, shall I just read them out and put your hand up if there's particular things you wanted to explore about any of those particular things on the agenda? So the next thing is the investment programme. People particularly interested in any of that? Delivery assurance? Transformation programme? Yeah. Okay, some interest there. And transport infrastructure projects there as well. Okay, and you as well, Tim? Should we? Okay, I'm going to ask two questions about the investment programme and keep them very quick. The regional transport model is really a yes/no question. Is that going to be brought in-house, or is that going to be led by consultants?
I think we've got an officer about to walk up to the table to answer the question on how the directorate are going to achieve the regional transport model for us.
It's a long journey for a kind of a yes/no answer, but I'm not really making any judgment. I'm just interested, yeah, no, just curious.
If you could repeat the question, Chair, I was rather further back in the
group. There's a regional transport model proposed, which is a kind of very technical black box kind of thing. I've worked in transport and still don't really understand them. Is that going to be brought in-house and trying to sort of skill up the WECA teams, or is that going to be led by consultants?
So, thank you, Chair. So it's going to be led by the combined authority with the unitary authorities. It's going to be a joint effort across the region. It's a little bit pointless really having an isolated group within the combined authority doing that sort of activity. So it's across the region. It's giving clarity to how you drive the strategic narrative for transport through project delivery.
I understand its purpose. I'm just sort of very keen to see some of that intelligence and capacity brought into the combined authority and the unitaries, rather than just going out to consultants.
Yeah, I encourage activity.
And it's not an easy thing to do.
It isn't. now is to gain that intelligence within the authority in the region. So our entire objective is to move away from using consultants for these activities.
Good. Okay, that's a nice simple answer, and I'm pretty sure that a number of other combined authorities are moving in a similar direction, which is good news. Shall we move on then to, there wasn't much on delivery assurance that people wanted to talk about? No. So let's move on to the transformation programme. Alison, you had a question.
So obviously we're largely, well, most of us are new to scrutiny, and we've come in very much in the middle of this process. And I do understand that the situation has changed and many excellent initiatives have occurred. But I think it is something that we as scrutiny, oversight and scrutiny, ought to bring some focus to bear on in a more sort of concentrated way at some point, because it's quite difficult to really assess how it's all going from these very helpful charts, but it's all new information to us. But I noticed particularly on page 125 that there is an interim VFM report from Grant Thornton, which I would have expected scrutiny to have been presented with, if you like, because I would have thought that's very much part of the monitoring of how you're doing on this very important programme in the light of the statutory and other recommendations that have been made as part of this process. So will we be able to see that, and could we do that at a time when we actually spend a little bit of time looking at this whole transformation programme, not least because we've got constitution amendments that have to be made, and we'll want to talk about how we're going to look at all that in an oversight way as much as anything else. There's a lot to do, and that seemed to me an important stage that we need to be aware of.
I think there's a supplementary question to that as well from me, which is we're writing a new a regional economic strategy, and I'd like to sort of know if the value for money report and this new strategy, there'll be a sort of a review of our investment programme and how that we might sort of go about stopping some projects and starting some new projects.
So the value for money report was reported as part of the annual report to Audit Committee in December. So it is available as a report, but I would suggest that we wouldn't necessarily do a full review of it in two different forums, but absolutely you can have access to it. It's a draft report because the governance element of it, Grant Thornton have yet to complete that work, which they're anticipating doing by the end of the financial year, and it will then be reported to the next Audit Committee after that.
Well, I would have thought from a scrutiny point of view, although governance is primarily audit, there certainly is a governance angle that we ought to be aware of and be monitoring as well. So it'd be helpful to be kept abreast of that.
I guess, Jess, you've popped up to talk about how maybe the value for money report and generally the overall review of the strategy is going to then be reflected in the investment programme, and maybe making some difficult decisions to stop some of those things that aren't really working.
Well, certainly in terms of, we will absolutely be reflecting, using the regional strategy as a framework through which to assess our investment strategy and our sort of prioritisation. I think the question about what we start and what we stop is one we will need to come to once we've got the strategy in place. In terms of timing for that, we're aiming to have it, we're in the process of kind of engagement with our regional partners on the strategy, which we'll be doing over sort of February and March, having already done a kind of programme of engagement in the sort of early phase on the back of the evidence base that we've produced, which was towards the end of last year. So we're aiming to get a strategy in place for the summer to bring to the committee in June, hopefully.
I look forward to seeing it on the forward plan.
Yes.
Anything else? I mean, for me, when I read the transformation report, I would like to say thank you to officers, because I think you've done an incredible job, and a lot of progress has been made, and you're seeing a lot of things being closed down because it's been done. I think we can all, and really this is not an officer thing, this is a political thing. We're seeing very, very slow progress on those kind of fundamental discussions about the role and purpose of the combined authority, particularly at a political level. And I was slightly worried to see there's a proposal finally, having had mediated or one-to-one conversations with the leaders, that those are going to be brought together in March for a mediated conversation between leaders. Just around the same time, presumably, that the Bristol is going into its pre-election period, and the person who would naturally be part of that conversation will no longer be part of the administration of Bristol as of May. So I'm wondering if the timing of that is really the best idea, and whether or not anyone has any feeling that maybe that would be premature to do this in March.
If I may just make a quick comment, just also to draw members' attention to, there's a new recommendation 1 of the budget report, which is to agree the role and purpose by autumn. So hopefully that will get agreed on Friday, and then we've got a very clear commitment with a clear timeline to that happening.
Can I just come back in on that specific point about the timing of clearly we are almost permanently in a position of flux, aren't we, within the combined authority in terms of election cycles within our constituent authorities or at combined authority level. So there's never a perfect time, but I would be very I would rather we didn't postpone this any longer. I think that as Rachel has mentioned, we're aiming to conclude the role and purpose exercise by the autumn, by which time the new administration in Bristol will be well established and will be able to absolutely feed in. But I think that kicking this off in March would be positive and would at least allow everybody else to begin to make some progress on this discussion.
I appreciate my comments maybe slightly push me, pull you, get on with it, but don't get on with it. But I guess as long as we're all alert to that, and that there may be a slightly different feeling come May, and that it's not all sort of baked in, but is a springboard for engaging with the new authority, then that feels like a good thing. The other thing I'd like to test with members here is I feel that there's a lot of what I think we've heard the monitoring officer described before as quite low-hanging fruit in the Constitution that really needs to be changed, and actually has driven some conflict where the Constitution's not absolutely clear. And I'd like to think that, yes, the role and purpose is an absolutely vital discussion, but actually I feel there's maybe a chance to build sort of trust and maybe some momentum for this change programme by actually trying to tackle some of the stuff, the stuff that we can do, which is within our gift and doesn't require us to sort of majorly rewrite the Constitution and go back to government. So I'm hoping that that it might be a suggestion of this group, as long as I'm not barking up the wrong tree, that we would like to see maybe a bit more willingness of all parties to cooperate with kind of sorting out some of the kind of day-to-day aspects of the Constitution, rather than maybe it's the whole thing. And that would be a recommendation I'd quite like to make to the committee on Friday. But I don't know if that would be helpful from the monitoring officer, and I don't know if that's something that people around the table would agree, members would agree.
Yes, I want to come back on that, Chair. I was, pardon me, hopeful there was low-hanging fruit. When I got closer to the tree, I realised it was a little bit out of reach. But there we are. That is what it is. But any recommendation along those lines from this committee and the audit committee are, of course, to be welcomed, because if those are the views of the committee, then those are the things we need to crack on and do. I appreciate that you and I have had conversations about, and Councillor Stretfield James has mentioned it before, about a task and finish process in the new financial year, looking into governance, which the Constitution will obviously play a big part of. So hopefully that'll be the time when we'll be able to get some real momentum behind that piece of work as well.
So is it okay if I put some sort of recommendation in there? I mean, just for the absence of doubt, we've got one last thing to talk about, but I'll be trying to write something by tomorrow evening, and then really it's a sort of 36-hour by Thursday lunchtime turnaround if you wanted to make any comments on what I've written. So I'll be going, I've got my work cut out, and I would hope that you'd on either Tuesday or Wednesday evenings have a quick look and help me make it as impactful as it can be. Shall we move on now to the transport infrastructure projects? Alison, you had a comment or a question?
I'll defer to Tim first, because he's much more expert on than I am, and then if he doesn't cover it, I will come back.
One, that's very kind. Two, there's zero chance I'm going to cover what you were to bring up. Mine's very, very odd. I just wanted to sort of raise a question or point on the Zebra 2 scheme, which is the electric vehicle bidding scheme. I noticed that it's only going ahead with first for good logical reasons put forward in the report of timescales. What I was wondering is, as it's entitled Zebra 2, the funding model, obviously there was a Zebra 1, I presume, And I just know the way government works, there might be a zebra 3. So what I was sort of going to ask is, from the work that's already done, could we look to perhaps expand that to work with the other bus operators, that we begin to work on the preparations of a possible bid if zebra 3 was to come out, to enable them to be able to also buy into electrical infrastructure and electrical buses? Because I'm sort of aware that obviously First is the dominant bus company in our area, but we have some other smaller operators who I think would benefit from that. That's it.
I wouldn't like to comment on the national government's strategy for any more zebra bids, but the response to your comment, councillor, there's no reason why the other bus operators would not be involved in future bids. You would see in the paper this is a 75-25 opportunity for the current operator, which is First, to move forward some zero emission bus fleets. So we'd like to see other operators bring that forward as well in the future. But of course, it requires them to have some capital to be able to put into the investment, which will need them to reconsider how they want to do their business model in the future. So something for them to think about.
Alison.
I had two questions. One was zebra related. This is the first time I've seen anything about zebra, no doubt my ignorance, but does this cover any rural areas at all, or is this entirely urban? Is it Bristol centric? Just, I don't want an entire history of the thing, but a very brief. Could you just tell us what this is about?
Thank you. Yeah, the bid split into two elements. One's for fleet, the other one's for the depot. And the depots have been examined across the First Group's regional sector. We've looked at Bath depot as well as the Bristol-centric depots, and the Bath depot has been taken out of scope as a consequence of its heritage status as well, next door to the station there. So we're left with some of their more Bristol-centric depots, that's right. Nonetheless, the fleet that will be running around will be in general use across the region.
Was that it?
That was it on zebra.
Okay.
Unless anyone else has got any zebra related questions.
I had one on EV charging, but well, really the two questions are, I wasn't clear what was going to happen to the revenue. Is it just to sort of keep the scheme running? And I would like to see, if we are having that many public charging points, every effort being made to influence the private market to make sure that they can be good interoperability, if that's all good. Because I think that's the role of, if we're going to invest public money in EV charging points, we should be trying to influence the market to make sure that it's easy and convenient to use any charging point, and working with the private sector to do so.
Thank you, Chair. On your first point of revenue, I'm not sure, but I can check on that and come back to you. And the second point, this is about driving the private market, with the exception of the Bristol administration area, which is running through Revive and have first call on charging points. The other administrations will be very open market tender. So this is about the private sector and subsidising that private sector to drive the outputs.
Okay. Good. I'll put a note in my recommendations, just that we're trying to sort of influence the market, not just be driven by it. There is one. So I think we've got through everything on the main. Oh, Alison.
There was just one question on the BSIP delegation aspect, which is page 179. I just wanted to know, with these, you've set out the decisions which have been approved through the delegation. Ones we know about, it's the big subject, the birthday offer. But I just want to know whether the other matters which are set out in the following bullet points are these historic decisions, or are they quite recent? It doesn't say when these decisions were made, and I don't know anything about the Enhanced Commercial Services Project, but we've just spent 4 very detailed meetings talking about BSIP, so maybe I missed something that was along the way. And or Assess West, I think we did discuss Assess West in the last, but anyway, so two-point question is, when were these decisions made? And what is the Enhanced Commercial Services Project?
First, refer to my officer at the back of the room, actually, if you could come and join us. Sorry, the first question was,
when were these delegated decisions made? There's a lot of controversy about these decisions being taken. You know, were they done in consultation with the unitary authorities, officers, and members about all of the subjects? It's a hot topic.
Yeah.
So I just want to know if this is new or old.
Yeah.
So according to this, the following decisions have been approved.
Well, quite, but doesn't say when.
That has taken place, but I think it would be useful. It's great to see a bit more accountability for the delegated decisions and coming through to actual committee reports so they're visible. I think there's a learning point here, Richard, that we would like to see the dates that those decisions were made as part of this reporting going forward.
Certainly a note after if that helps.
And we've just been told that we can have a note afterwards as well. Mark.
Just looking at the transport infrastructure plan, I'm pleased to see a range of transport innovations around rail, which I think is often forgotten in the region, particularly for Filton Bank, where the forward tracking took a lot of time and effort to get that in place, and the government cut electrification into Temple Mead. So I'm pleased to see a project that might put that in place. Just two quick questions. Firstly, I'm not seeing anything in there around improving accessibility at existing rail stations. I understand new rail stations and the compliance that Network Rail has to go through, but there's a bit of a gap left with existing rail stations that may not be DDA compliant. And I know Network Rail perhaps doesn't see its full obligations in that sense. So that's question one. And question two is, because this is really a complex, technical, long-term and very expensive form of public transport, does WECA have the right expertise internally? I know that we can all be very dependent on external consultants, which are expensive, but is there enough resource in-house to drive some of these projects?
Probably ought to say just before Malcolm Parsons comes in to speak, he is actually a secondee from Network Rail. So obviously he'll have to, which we're very lucky to have. I hasten to add for us really, and it was a increase in resources which the committee voted through unanimously last year to help us. That we've delivered one railway station, we've got another 7 to do. And some significant line works as well. So Portishead to Bristol Timber Quarter is a project which will be in the region of 170 to 200 million. It is a big program of work to do. You don't do that without the resources, because you'll make a mistake that will cost you a lot more than that if you don't. Same with Bristol Timber Quarter. But Malcolm is a secondee from Network Rail. It's been with us probably a couple of years and will be with us hopefully for another period of time ahead of that as well.
Thank you, Richard. I indeed, I was going to declare my conflict of interest there.
Well, hopefully it's a confluence of interest. But,
it is indeed.
We've got 5 minutes left in the meeting, so if we could keep this down to a minute or two, please.
I will make them brief. There is a paragraph in the report that talks about accessibility. We do recognise that the accessibility of our stations in the region is not great. We're currently working on a plan for Lawrence Hill under the CRSTS. Our next one after that would be Parsons Street. And following that, we'll be looking at Avonmouth. Sorry, at the room at the back there. We are, as we know, looking at Lawrence Hill to make that accessible, then Parsons Street, Bedminster will be following that, and we've also got one at Avonmouth. So we're doing a lot of work in the accessibility space. We've got a great team working within the Transport Directorate delivering rail. We're on site at Ashley Down to Portway last year, and we'll go forward to deliver some more within the region. We are also looking within the electrification space to try and leave the Department for Transport to start funding some of this stuff, because you recognise that this is a curtailed piece of work from 2016. And frankly, to be able to drive decarbonisation in our region, we need to get back to electric rolling stock. We can't carry on running diesel trains. So there seems to be limited interest from central government. And what we want to do is re-spark that, reignite that interest from central government, demonstrate to them that is deliverable within a reasonable funding window. And Filton Bank was designed to take it. So that's our focus of interest. Hope that helps.
So in a sense that it's almost this 375,000 or whatever it was is almost a sort of way of sparking central government interests and reigniting that project. Sparks and reignite is probably the wrong analogy.
And Chair, if I can just add, we've had incredible support from the Department for Transport around these railway programs that we've had as well. Our mayor has been incredibly driven around the railway projects that we continue to work on, as have North Somerset Council Councillor Mike Bell, not Councillor Mike Bird, although I'm sure he is also equally supportive around it. But also, the ministers and DFT and the Secretary of State came and walked round, the Portishead to Bristol Temple Quarter site, and has been incredibly supportive as well. It is up there in terms of priorities, and we work really hard with the officials to make some of these challenging programs work because of the benefit they bring to residents and business.
Thanks, Mark. I think you may have the final question.
Just a really quick point. My point about Network Rail was not a flippant one. I've met with rail ministers in the past, often with local MPs, to be told these are obligations for Network Rail. So there is a bit of a grey area. So I'm glad that's being addressed. Just also the observation that a lot of our transport projects in more recent years have had additional costs added to them to make them electrification friendly. So for me, it's a great thing to pursue because we've actually paid up front for a lot of this.
The one other thing that we haven't really got much time to give much thing to is the wind up of the LEP and how that's absorbed into the combined authorities. Unless anyone wants to disagree, I think that really needs to be part of the role and purpose of the LEP and the new constitution, and having a really clear and specific role of how the advisory boards work and making sure that the LEP is absorbed into one. So I'll come up with a sentence or two about that, which you can have a look at and comment on. Just to say that we will be having a meeting on an informal meeting on the 9th of February. We will be, amongst other things, hearing from, well, actually the proposed agenda at the moment is to hear more about carbon budgeting and the proposals as they're in development, which is a really good thing because we actually hear about something that's in development. We want to discuss the Centre for Government and Scrutiny next steps because there is a contract with them to do some more work, and looking and then maybe starting to kick off a task and finish group around the governance and constitution. We'll also be hearing about the idea of an idea from Ben, actually, which was around a SharePoint site for scrutiny members. So we can actually start looking at the information we need to actually scrutinise and have it available on a SharePoint site and sort of some sort of real-time monitoring dashboard. So that's being worked on now, and we'll hear about that. And I think we'll just think a little bit more now we've got some additional scrutiny capacity in because of the budget and recruitment, thinking about what task and finish groups we want to do and how we might start having some specialists or leads for individual parts of our scrutiny role. Because at the moment, I think there's a huge amount of paperwork. Here we go. That's the paperwork for the committee, and I think it'd be useful if we actually had sort of transport lead, governance lead, business and skills lead, so that we've got we're not all trying to do everything. So that's something that we'll be looking at our informal meeting on the 9th of February. So that means that just about a minute over time. Just to remind you all that I will be circulating some comments, hopefully tomorrow early evening, feedback by hopefully Thursday lunchtime, and then we'll get that out pretty quickly published. And I'm going to say that that's the close of this meeting. And thank you all for your participation. And we'll see you all again for the next formal meeting on Friday, informal meeting on Friday, the 9th of February, and the next public meeting to be held on Monday, the 11th of March. See you all then.